I'm going to just introduce our next speaker, who is also our host and who is the keynote speaker for today. And it is Jelani Cobb, the dean here at the Columbia School of Journalism. And Jelani said, whatever you do in this introduction, keep it short. So I'm going to try to do that. I want to thank you, Jelani, for hosting us here. So on behalf of IPI, North American Committee, thank you. I want to thank you as an alum in the journalism school for the vision you're bringing here. I'm really excited for your leadership. We stand by ready to help any way we can. We're proud that our programs, Report for America and other initiatives we've done, have drawn on your students here. I think we've had more than 40 reporters come from this school into Report for America and getting their first job out of graduate school in the field. And just lastly, as a journalist, as a writer, I want to thank you for your voice. It's so resonant, it's so powerful, and it is so needed. Thank you. Jelani Cobb.
Is this one on? Okay, good. Good morning. Oh, seriously? Good morning. Okay, much better. Welcome, and thank you, Charlie, for that introduction. I am very pleased and very happy to see all of you here. For those of you who were here for yesterday's sessions, these were amazing, enlightening perspectives from really thoughtful people and a cross-section of people from around the world. And exactly what I think we need to be doing in this moment. And so for a lot of reasons, I'm very excited. And particularly excited to see our colleague and faculty member Azmat Khan's panel yesterday. And the launch of the Simon & June Lee Center for Global Journalism. All these things are just amazing to be happening at one point. So I'm going to start with a few questions. They'll seem random, but by the time we get through it, they will make a little bit of sense. So the first is to please raise your hand if you are right-handed. Okay, good. Columbia is pleased and proud to welcome IPI back to campus more than 70 years after its founding on this campus. It is a particularly fitting moment to bring this organization and all of you who care about press freedoms back to where IPI started. Yesterday, we celebrated the launch of the Simon & June Lee Center for Global Journalism, directed by Azmat Khan, an exceptional international reporter, now recognized for her work in the New York Times with a Pulitzer Prize in international reporting that she shares with other reporters there. Her work on civilian casualties of war, which she has now done for 6 years, is a demanding, difficult beat, but it's necessary work. As Azmat put it to her colleagues at the Times when the Pulitzer was announced, every American deserves to be informed of the wars waged in their names. Under her leadership, this new center will help train the next generation of journalists with similarly inspiring journalistic ambitions who will report the essential stories all over the globe, and it will join with all of you in pushing ourselves to find new ways of getting the stories and bringing them back to our audiences. For this important contribution to journalism, we have Simon & June Lee to thank, because it is their philanthropy and their deep knowledge of why reporting stories worldwide is so vital that made this possible. I should add, we feel particularly proud that Simon is a graduate of Columbia and a long-serving and committed member of our board, who has also helped to bring dozens of students to Columbia to study from other countries through their generous giving and scholarships. There's another reason the center's creation is well-timed, as is IPI to reconnection with their place of origin. As Simon Lee reminded us yesterday, IPI was founded on this campus by a group of editors worldwide to improve the practice of journalism and to safeguard the free flow of information and press freedoms. We have our work cut out for us. All around the world, we see a rising tide of authoritarianism which threatens this mission. It threatens individual and courageous reporters such as Dmitry Muratov and Maria Ressa and many others. And it threatens the foundational protection for everything that we do. So at this point, I'm going to ask you another seemingly random question. Raise your hand if you played a sport at any point in your life. Okay, thank you. It's notable to me that in 1950, the same year, it was like, what is this guy talking about? It'll make sense. It's notable to me that in 1950, the same year that this organization was founded, the columnist Drew Pearson began a series of scathing attacks upon the Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. And this was in response to his own doubts, his own skepticism about a speech that Senator Joseph McCarthy had given in Wheeling, West Virginia, where he famously claimed to have the names of 205 communists who were employed by the United States State Department. In the course of his response, Senator McCarthy gave 7 consecutive speeches on the floor of the Senate denouncing Mr. Pearson's work and demanding that there be a news boycott of his column and anything associated with him. This culminated in an incident in December of that year where Joseph McCarthy and Drew Pearson found themselves at the same club, kind of a social club, and McCarthy attacked Drew Pearson, choked him, and kicked him in the groin. But it was notable that Drew Pearson's work had struck a nerve. He had understood how central weaponizing the news had been to the rising tide of what was to become McCarthyism. My graduate school advisor and Joseph McCarthy biographer, David Oshinsky, pointed this out in his biography, Conspiracy So Immense. McCarthy recognized how to game newspapers. And he said, if I give a delicious scoop on Friday afternoon where there's no time to actually follow up, I'll create a conflict. Do I track down this story? Do I see if this actually holds up, or do I run with it? Or do I risk letting someone else get the story first? And he did this again and again and again. The more outrageous the claim, the more useful it was to news. Newspapers themselves, publishers, recognized that when you put a quote from Joseph McCarthy above the fold on page 1, you sold more copies. And so it became an inherent conflict of interest about your veracity, the veracity of what you are reporting, and the utility of the salaciousness that McCarthy was peddling. It's not a coincidence that Senator McCarthy's political demise was brought about by a different medium, television. And in working in the conversations that we have and the recognition that we give to Edward R. Murrow, we tend to overlook the fact that demagogues tend to have a favorite medium of communication. When we find a demagogue, we always find that they have one form of communication that they've mastered. Television had very different prerequisites than newspapers did. And it was possible by simply showing people what McCarthy looked like, how he talked, how he behaved, that you could begin to undermine the edifice of lies that he had used to such disastrous effect. I thought about this. I've thought about that incident, about that moment, a number of times over the recent years. Never so sharply as February 2016, when Les Moonves, who was then the president of the CBS network, famously stated that Donald Trump was, quote, bad for America, but really great for CBS News. And he was expressing or reiterating that same conflict that newspaper editors saw around Joseph McCarthy. And what it said to me, and I immediately called David Oshinsky when I saw that, and I was like, did this remind you? He was like, it reminded me at that very moment of the book that I'd written. And so when I looked at that moment, it occurred to me that it's not simply enough to learn from history, but to recall and to transmit the lessons of history to subsequent generations. We had forgotten what we were supposed to learn from McCarthyism in the United States. We had forgotten, for instance, that newspaper editors began toward the end of McCarthy, where it was much more clear the kind of negative effect and deleterious effect that he had on American democracy, that people began fact-checking him within the headlines. McCarthy accuses this person of communism, parentheses, no evidence that this person is a communist. We live in a moment where we have seen a global rise of authoritarianism. There are lots of reasons that we can find for this, certainly facilitated by the end of the Cold War, the rise of globalism, reanimating bitter ancient hatreds, playing to some of the, you are muted. I won't go conspiratorial here. Certainly enabled by global dynamics of the internet and our means of communication, but have really presented to us once again the fundamental questions of human nature and how we can organize ourselves into peaceful, democratic societies that recognize human rights. I have to say that I believe that our media in the United States has been slow to recognize the implications of these developments for ourselves. So I have another question for you, or another request. Raise your hand if you are right-handed and played a sport. Now, you don't have to respond. You don't have to tell me about it, but just think about the first time, if you played a sport, basketball, baseball, softball, boxing, tennis. Think about the first time you faced a left-hander. When I ask my students this question, they groan. Oh, it was terrible. Everything was upside down. The things that you do, I played baseball, and when a left-hander throws a curveball, it does the exact opposite of what happens when a right-hander throws a curveball. If you behave facing a left-hander the way that you behave facing a right-hander, you do the exact wrong thing. We confront at this moment, particularly in the United States, what I've come to call the left-handed problem. That we are engaging in a circumstance in which the rules and the precepts, and the prerequisites are completely different. And if we proceed with the same sort of approach that we used in other times, we will do the exact wrong thing. I'm happy to see IPI here today. I'm happy to see that IPI is here in this particular moment because I believe that there are lessons to be learned. I think that our history as Americans and a kind of facile belief that we are the citadel and the stronghold of press freedom has blinded us in some ways to the lessons that we could learn from our colleagues around the world who have much more experience reporting in directly authoritarian circumstances. And I think that an element of democratic humility is useful for us here. And so, in that regard, I was eager to hear from Dmitry Muratov yesterday, and eager to hear from Maria Ressa when she speaks today. The last thing that I'll say is that for us, and I also say for my own kind of personal approach to this, and I'm a person whose career I've written a good deal about race in the United States, and it's not out of a kind of fixation on race or an obsession with identity or identity politics, but it's been precisely driven by the question of the American tolerance for anti-democracy, and race being the most visible and useful barometer at which I could get to those questions. So I think that all of these things are essential, all of these things are key, and all of these things factor into why we are happy to welcome you here to Columbia University, to our campus today, to Pulitzer Hall, and to this community. And we look forward to all of the insights and conversations that will happen. We won't answer all of the questions. We won't resolve all the conflicts, but we will get that much closer to answers and resolution than we would have been had we not come together today. Thank you.